Hello, my name is Andrea Pitt. Thank you for joining me today. In this presentation, we'll explore how to shift accessibility left or earlier in the software development process. In Pressman's generic process model, we see that the main framework activities are communication, planning, modeling, construction, and deployment. All too often, considerations for how to make software accessible to people with disabilities is pushed back to the final stage of deployment or left off completely as tech debt. This is because either accessibility wasn't considered in the development process or it wasn't considered early enough in the process. Therefore, problems created by earlier decisions end up in the deployed product. But if we shift accessibility left to earlier stages in the software development process, we can more easily prevent built-in barriers in software for people with disabilities, identify and address existing problems sooner, and reduce or eliminate accessibility issues in the resulting software. At what stage has accessibility been included in past software projects that you've worked on? If you answered any stage before the deployment phase, then great job. You've already made some progress with shifting accessibility left to earlier stages in the software development process, and this presentation can show you more ways to keep shifting left. If your answer was the deployment phase, then hopefully this presentation will provide some ideas for how to include accessibility in earlier project phases. Why should we make software accessible? Not only is making software accessible to people with disabilities the right thing to do, it also makes sense for a lot of other reasons. Non-disabled users also use features that are made for people with disabilities. For example, video captions can be used when someone wants to watch a video without sound in a public place. Power users often use keyboard shortcuts to navigate a program because it's faster than clicking, and voice-to-text can be used by someone who wants to send a message hands-free. And this list could go on with more examples. Another reason is that accessible code is often better code. For example, when websites use good page structure, semantic code, or add text content for multimedia, this will often improve the search engine optimization, or SEO, of the site because crawlers will be able to index that content. Finally, most people will experience a disability at some point in their lifetime, whether it is a temporary disability from something like a broken bone or a permanent disability such as failing eyesight or hearing from growing older. Making software accessible ensures that people, maybe even yourself, can still use it as their life changes. When accessibility issues make it to the deployment phase, this results in bugs being reported by users. In the case of software with significant barriers for people with disabilities, it could even mean lawsuits. It's not hard to imagine that correcting a significant problem could mean a lot of time and expense to re-engineer an inaccessible system. But what about this bug? This button has no accessible content because it has an image inside of it. When a screen reader reaches this button, it will just announce button coolimage.png because it will try to read the file name if accessible content isn't provided. Screen reader users who can't see the image won't know what this button is supposed to do, while sighted users will be able to interpret the button's meaning by the image. One of the ways to fix this is to add alternative text to the image. Now screen reader users could tell that this button is to like something. So we would probably say that the cost of fixing this bug is just a few minutes of a developer's time, right? Actually, it's a lot more than that because the bug has to be reported, routed, researched, fixed, and then deployed. And if this is happening over and over for small bugs that could have been prevented earlier, then those costs add up. We can see pretty clearly here that shifting accessibility left to prevent large or small issues from appearing in an end product makes sense from a business perspective as well as an ethical perspective. Let's talk about how to shift accessibility left into the construction phase by including it in testing. There are lots of automated testing options available which will run various test suites with accessibility rules against your code. Here are a few as examples. JustAx is a package which will run accessibility testing suites during unit testing. CypressAx is a plugin for Cypress testing tools that integrates accessibility testing suites into end-to-end testing. Other tools can scan an interface and provide a report of accessibility issues. For example, here are two tools that can scan website interfaces. Axe DevTools, and the Wave Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool, which are both browser extensions. These tools are great for finding common accessibility issues such as color contrast, web page structure, missing alternative text for images, missing content for buttons or links, missing labels for form inputs, and more. However, only a fraction of accessibility problems can be caught with automated testing, and manual testing is required to catch the remainder. Here are just a few accessibility criteria which need to be evaluated with manual testing. To check zoom, the interface should zoom correctly according to the user's system or browser settings, up to 400%, and the page content should not overflow the screen, become blurry, etc. To check high contrast, turn on high contrast mode in the system settings and ensure that the UI respects these settings and that no content is lost. To check tab order, check that hitting tab navigates through all focusable elements in the correct order and a focus indicator is activated. To check keyboard interactions, ensure that all keyboard interactions required for interface elements work. For example, hitting space or enter activates a button element. This is just a brief overview of a few things that will need to be tested manually. For more information, please see the provided link to a good guide on manual testing after completion of automated testing. But we can shift left even more by considering accessibility as we write our code. Perhaps during the previous slide on testing, you were wondering, wouldn't it be easier to just not write inaccessible code in the first place, and how? Here are steps we can take to write accessible code from the outset. Check what linters are available for your IDE and the language that you are programming in. These will do some checking of your code as you write it and then provide some indication, either a highlight or output to the console of problems. This way, developers can know right away if they made a mistake, and then the code wouldn't have to be corrected later during testing or as a bug. For example, two linters available for React developers using Visual Studio Code are Act DevTools linter and ESLint plugin JSX Ally. Another step developers can take is to choose dependencies that are already accessible. For example, there are many options out there for building a UI. Before choosing a library to use in your project, do some research and find out which ones have invested in making their UI components accessible. A developer working in React might choose one of these two libraries, which have very good reputations for prioritizing accessibility, Material UI or Cauldron React. The same principle applies to any other dependencies that were developed by someone else, like media players, themes, etc. But what if we could shift left even further by considering accessibility as we design software? Luckily, there are tools that plug into popular design programs that will alert designers if they've overlooked an accessibility requirement, such as color contrast. For example, Figma is a popular design program, and the Axe for Designers plugin is a free plugin that will scan designs to catch accessibility issues, similar to how the Axe DevTools browser extension will scan web pages. Another tactic is to include personas of people with disabilities. These personas are fictional representations of real-life users, which help developers and designers consider how the software will be used by a variety of people and not just an ideal user. To develop personas, use data about actual users to determine what disabilities are represented in the user population. Aim to cover a wide range of disabilities and even combine different disabilities. But what if we could include accessibility right from the beginning of a project? It might sound fairly obvious, but one approach is to include accessibility in the project's requirements. For example, a team planning a new website, one requirement might be that the site must be WCAG 2.2 AA compliant. WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and this requirement describes the version 2.2 and level of compliance, A, AA, or AAA. If you're not familiar with the WCAG criteria, it covers all of the accessibility issues that we've discussed so far. By including accessibility as a project requirement, it's not hard to imagine how all the other solutions we've discussed would naturally flow out of the design, development, and testing stages without having to be considered as a separate topic in those stages. Including accessibility from the beginning of a project helps to ensure that the functionality and designs needed to support accessibility will become baked into the resulting product and won't have to be added on top of or shoehorned into existing infrastructure later on. I do want to include a word of caution here that even if accessibility is included in a project's requirements, it can still fall off the radar during the rest of the development process. This touches on a whole other area of conversation having to do with advocating for accessibility within an organization and developing a culture geared towards accessibility. This presentation has discussed several ways to shift accessibility left in the software development process. There are many other effective methods and tools that this presentation didn't mention. If you're interested in learning more about building accessible software, then this slide lists some great resources to start your journey. Thank you again for joining, and I hope you've enjoyed this presentation on shifting accessibility left in the software development process.